my dear colleagues and friends. The topic that I would like to discuss is titled as Indigenous Knowledge, Problems of Restoration, Conservation and Transmission. When we discuss local knowledge, we have to have certain epistemological meanings, measures and parameters now universally accepted in mind. You cannot discuss local knowledge in an Indian region, in an Indian village with parameters drawn from that knowledge system as such. It will be very, very narrow. We have to accept the universally ordained criteria of recognizing what is knowledge. You cannot think of knowledge which is not stamped as scientific today acceptable. You cannot go by sentiments to valorize a system of knowledge that existed sometime in the past, somewhere in the corner of the subcontinent. But at the same time, it's quite possible that there could be valid knowledge, sometimes knowledge axiomatically given, knowledge uncritically accepted, but at the same time, that uncritically accepted knowledge would be having enormous insights which would lead to the making of a hypothesis to be tested scientifically. Now, for example, tulasi, a plant, basil, it is ritually important, culturally important, and it's added as part of a large number of herbal medicines prepared. The medicinal value of basil, tulasi is clear. But when you say you have any problem, let it be chest congestion, let it be stomach upset, you consume a few tulsi leaves. You are only referring to an age-old prescription. And then also you are referring to a practice. All that you will be able to prepare then would be an ethnographic compilation of the practices. Where is knowledge lost today? Now, I remember my grandfather telling an old man who came and said, I am not able to breathe properly when I get out of the temple tank. Then grandfather immediately told him, you take a handful of tulsi leaves, wash it, and then dip in the tank 7 times, and then get out of it. Without rubbing your hair, without using towel, you go to the temple, take several rounds, but eat the tulsi leaf one after the other. It's a ritually charged practice only. But when science is taking care of this, science is entering into it, then the knowledge domain becomes totally different. For example, Right Reverend Thomas Simmant, if he is looking at it as a scientist, and he would be interested in knowing the active principle in tulsi leaf. What is the active principle there? That's how a chemist will be able to think about it. An organic chemistry, a specialist will try to discover the active principle and then would go to the specific context of the biochemical situation where this active principle would be working in what way. And knowledge is getting unraveled stage by stage, and that knowledge was not with my grandfather. But then there is this discovery today that tulsi leaf has the active principle which has enormous capacity to dissolve thrombose. Now I am able to commonsensically relate that the old man who came with the complaint of having breathing problem when he is doing even a small work, he had heart congestion. Lot of thrombus must have got accumulated at the artery, and he was having problem of having enough blood to the heart. But Tulsi leaves, grandfather never had any idea about how Tulsi leaves worked, because no notion of active principle, no notion of the chemical process, no notion of the actual contextual implications of an active principle in the larger chemical scenario. But practice was there. So you find knowledge as embedded in. And if the block was not so serious, then that could have cured his illness. But the treatment is more or less a ritual package. He comes from that kind of a milieu. He is advised to go to the temple Tangaging and then take bath and go to the temple, take the pradakshina, and then along with that the treatment is also there. But treatment is not anything different from the ritual practice as well. But if you go around collecting local knowledge and also making an ethnographic compilation of practices which you will see even today among many Orthodox Vaidyas, just as my grandfather did. And unless you go beyond that, you will not be able to produce knowledge out of it. By way of local knowledge, if you are only making a compilation of ethnographic compilation of practices, it wouldn't be treated by the scientific world as knowledge. You may call it local knowledge for sentiments attached to it. The scientists are not interested in sentiments. Then this knowledge is highly prescriptive. You are asked to accept ipso facto certain instructions. Now you follow this. Don't ask me why. Why should I follow? What is the problem with my chest? Why am I feeling suffocated? This was not the case previously. What is happening to my body? There is no answer in the local knowledge system. But it is important in the sense you have embedded knowledge, because later on scientifically you discover that there is one-to-one correspondence between the object used by way of treatment and then the science that you have produced out of it, taking it as a hypothesis. A large number of patents taken by European scientists and American scientists drawing good hypotheses from our local knowledge. On basil leaf alone there are 27 patents. On turmeric you have 48 patents. All about the active principle and then its specific context in the biochemical process. And also through various formulations around the same organic molecule in the context of drug preparation, making of drugs. We have our own traditional mode of making drugs. You grind certain things and prepare it in the form of globulates, get it dried up in the sun, and then that is used as medicine. We have no idea about the active principle, but certainly Ayurvedic knowledge has the concept of rasa bhava. Rasa bhava is the chemical bhava or the chemical power of that. But Ayurveda doesn't stop there. Ayurveda talks about prabhava also. We do not have a chemical equivalent for that. What is prabhava? Rasa Bhava, okay. You can cross Rasa Bhava and talk about active principle. But Prabhava means what? So a Vaidya would say, no, don't collect that plant from that particular place. You have to collect the plant from this sort of an area. And from such and such landscape ecosystems, you might see these plants in plenty. Don't collect them from there. And then their explanation will be based on Prabhava. The reason is they don't have Prabhava. But how do you recognize Prabhava? This knowledge cannot be transmitted. It becomes a big challenge. If you collect ethnographic data about all these, you store a lot of prescriptive information. You have to go beyond. You have to produce knowledge to communicate with the world. There, it has to be the language of epistemology, language of science of knowledge. You have to maintain epistemological properties like truth, rationality, techniques of confirmation, procedures of experimentation. These are universally adopted. You cannot say that, I meditated for half an hour and suddenly I got this insight. And what is the insight? Now, for this particular disease, you use this particular plant. Okay. That will give you some anthropological idea about the genesis of a practice. Genesis of a practice in traditional knowledge. But knowledge is not there if you talk about knowledge in the modern epistemological sense. You have to talk about objectivity, you have to talk about methodology, you have to talk about the analytical factors, and also you have to talk about the whole procedures of cognitive understanding. The cognitive process involving factual understanding, conceptual understanding, procedural understanding, and metacognitive understanding. So the whole world is thinking about knowledge in this kind of scientific context. Our main challenge is how to extricate local knowledge which is encrusted by culturally contingent practices, sentiments, religious presumptions, and on top of all, knowledge axiomatically derived and communicated authoritatively. Science doesn't prescribe. Science today is an open field of knowledge. Science won't boast saying that this is science, so you accept it. Science doesn't prescribe anything. Science is such an open field that it could hold good only for the time being until new science comes into path. So science is an open field amenable to falsification, incessant critical intervention. That is the reason why it is called scientific. Scientific knowledge is knowledge amenable to improvement. Something that is infallible is unscientific. Something that can be scientifically re-examined, reanalyzed, and then if it is amenable to that kind of constructive improvement upon itself, then it is called scientific knowledge. But local knowledge will not allow you to do that. Traditional knowledge will not allow you to do that. It becomes a big challenge for pedagogy. You cannot teach this. You cannot teach because knowledge has to be ferreted out. Knowledge doesn't exist. Knowledge is not just practice. You can have a recording of the practice. And you can have elaborate compendium prepared of practices. The task is with science. Science will have to go deep into it and then come out with items of knowledge now universally accepted. I come to the details later on. But this is the prolegomena or the general introduction that I have to present before you before I go about discussing the slides. Now, another important point also is that don't assume that there is anything called universally acceptable knowledge at any point of time in the past. It's only today you have universally accepted scientific knowledge. In the past, human societies were uneven, living in different landscape ecosystems and ecological conditions, adapting themselves to the conditions and evolving appropriate strategies of subsistence and survival. How people survived in an oasis surrounded by the desert would have nothing to do with how people survived in a wet evergreen forest in the Western Ghats, or the techniques adopted for survival, techniques adopted for subsistence in the mid-plains. That would be totally different from the practices and strategies evolved by people making their living in the hilly areas. Always, even now that is the case. If you travel some 200 kilometers towards the east, you will reach a place where you can see hunting gathering kind of people. So uneven development was something inescapable always. It is even today. At least 20% of the population would be following technology and knowledge far removed from what the mainstream is pursuing. It's a very, very small percentage of people you will find going always well with the latest phase of technology. You can talk about computer literacy, computer illiteracy, and so on. Computer is known to how many people? Even when you go to the educated people, an estimate shows that 68% of the educated people who are using computer use it more or less as typewriter. They do word processing. And you have a microscopic minority using computer for high computing. High power computing is totally different. Computer is meant for something totally different. What you people see largely putting it to use. Anyway, all these problems remain, but as teachers, you have to be on the one side knowing something about all these, and you have to know everything about something that you are teaching.